Marcus Webb parked his old work van at the very edge of the country club lot, and the valet in the crisp maroon vest looked at him the way you look at something that has wandered in from a landfill. He didn't know that the man stepping out of that battered white Ford with paint stains on his forearms and a toolbox rattling in the back owned the very ground the wedding tent was pitched on. He didn't know that, within the hour, the woman about to be married would understand exactly how badly she had misjudged the quiet man she'd once called worthless. Some mistakes take years to come due. This one was about to collect all at once. Before we go any further, if you believe that patience and dignity beat cruelty and arrogance every single time, do me a favor and hit that like button, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Stay with me to the end, because what pulls up in that parking lot changes everything. Now, let me take you back to how a good man ended up driving a work van to his ex-wife's wedding. Marcus and Diane had been married for 11 years. He was 26 when they met, a structural engineer who preferred building things to talking about them, a man who wore the same 3 flannel shirts and drove whatever ran and left the flashy living to other people. Diane had been drawn to him at first, or so he'd believed. She said she loved how steady he was, how he never raised his voice, how he'd fix anything she pointed at without complaint. But somewhere in the middle of those 11 years, steady became boring to her, and quiet became weak, and the man who could design a 40-story tower became, in her eyes, a man who simply lacked ambition. What Diane never understood was that Marcus wasn't lacking ambition. He was drowning in it, but quietly, the way he did everything. While she assumed he was just a salaried engineer clocking in and out, Marcus had spent nights and weekends for years building something of his own. A construction and development firm, started with 2 other engineers in a rented office no bigger than a garage. He never talked about it at dinner, because talking about it felt like bragging, and bragging felt like the loudest kind of insecurity. So he stayed silent, and Diane filled that silence with her own conclusions. The marriage ended 4 years ago. When Marcus was 37 and Diane was 38, it ended the way these things often do, not with an explosion, but with a slow grinding erosion. She wanted a bigger house. He wanted to reinvest the money. She wanted vacations to places she could photograph. He wanted to finish the project he'd sunk everything into. And then, one evening, she sat him down at their small kitchen table and told him, in a voice that was almost gentle, that she felt like she was outgrowing him, that she deserved a life that matched who she was becoming, that he was a good man, but that good wasn't enough anymore. He didn't fight it. That was the thing that surprised even him. He simply nodded, and the next morning he began the quiet work of dissolving 11 years of shared life. In the divorce, he gave her more than the law required. He let her keep the house, the newer car, most of the savings they held jointly. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance, had nearly come across the desk at him when he signed those papers. "Marcus, you are giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars you do not owe her." And Marcus had looked at her calmly and said, "The things I actually built, she never knew about. She's not entitled to those because she never believed they existed. Let her have the things she thinks are the whole of me." Because here is what Diane didn't know. Even at the moment their marriage ended, the firm Marcus had started in that garage-sized office had, over 15 years, grown into one of the most respected development companies in the state. Webb Sterling Development. They didn't just build buildings, they built neighborhoods, corporate campuses, mixed-use towers that redefined city skylines. And the country club where Diane was now planning her second wedding, the sprawling property, with its manicured greens and its stone clubhouse, sat on land that a Webb Sterling subsidiary had quietly acquired 18 months earlier as part of a larger development deal. Marcus didn't just own a stake in an anonymous firm. Marcus, through a chain of ownership no gossiping ex-wife would ever bother to trace, owned the very venue where she intended to celebrate leaving him behind. He learned about the wedding by accident. His nephew, a college kid named Tyler, who still spoke to Diane out of habit, mentioned it over coffee. You know Aunt Diane's getting married again, right? Some guy named Preston. Real estate money, apparently. She's doing the whole thing at Ashford Country Club. Tyler had said it carefully, watching his uncle's face for a reaction. Marcus had simply stirred his coffee and said, "Is that so?" But inside, something old and quiet had turned over, because Ashford Country Club was, on paper, Tyler would never see, part of his own holdings. Preston Halloran was the kind of man Diane had always believed she deserved. He was 52, tan in that year-round way that suggested boats and golf, with a laugh that filled rooms and a habit of describing himself as a self-made real estate mogul. In truth, Preston had inherited a modest portfolio of strip malls from his father and had spent 20 years failing to grow it, while telling everyone he was on the verge of enormous things. He was loud where Marcus was quiet, flashy where Marcus was plain, and Diane mistook the difference for proof she had finally chosen right. She did not know that Preston was leveraged to his eyeballs, that 2 of his properties were weeks from foreclosure, and that he had proposed to her, partly because he believed, wrongly, that she had money left from her divorce. The invitation to the wedding arrived at Marcus's office, of all places, forwarded by an assistant who didn't recognize the return address. It was Diane's handwriting on the envelope, and inside was a formal card and a small handwritten note. The note read, "Marcus, I know this is unusual, but I'd like you to come. 11 years meant something. And honestly, I want you to see that I've moved on to the life I always deserved. No hard feelings. Diane." He read it twice. There was cruelty folded inside the politeness, the kind she probably didn't even see herself. She wanted him there, not to heal anything, but to witness his own replacement, to watch her ascend while he stayed exactly where she'd left him. Patricia Vance, when he told her, was blunt. "Don't go. There's nothing there for you but a knife between the ribs." But Marcus had already decided. Not out of spite, he told himself, and mostly that was true. He would go, because 11 years did mean something, and because a part of him wanted to close the door properly, and because, if he was being fully honest, there was a small, clean curiosity in him about whether she had changed at all. He would go quietly, the way he did everything. He would not announce who he had become. He would simply be present and let the evening reveal whatever it revealed. And so, on a warm Saturday in late September, Marcus Webb made a decision that would look, to everyone watching, like the decision of a defeated man. He did not drive the black sedan that his company car service kept on standby. He did not put on the tailored suit that hung in his closet for board meetings. Instead, he pulled on a clean but simple gray shirt, a pair of slacks that had seen better years, and he climbed into the old white work van he still kept, the one from the earliest days of the firm, the one he drove to job sites when he wanted his crews to see him with his sleeves rolled up. He kept that van because it reminded him of where everything began. On this day, he drove it to Ashford Country Club because he wanted, one last time, to see how people treated a man they believed had nothing. The valet's expression told him everything. The young man in the maroon vest actually held up a hand as the van rolled toward the entrance, as if to redirect a delivery vehicle. "Sir, service and deliveries are around the back." Marcus rolled down the window, calm as still water. "I'm a guest, Marcus Webb." The valet checked a clipboard, frowned, checked again, and reluctantly waved him toward a distant corner of the lot, well away from the gleaming German sedans and Italian coupes lined up near the entrance. Marcus parked, stepped out, and walked toward the stone clubhouse he legally owned, carrying nothing but himself. The wedding was in the garden behind the clubhouse, a wide expanse of lawn under a white tent, strung with lights that would glow once the sun dropped. 200 guests, easily. Diane had spared no expense, and Marcus recognized the signs of someone spending money to prove a point rather than to celebrate a joy. He found a seat near the back. He didn't need a front row. It never needed to be seen. Diane spotted him before the ceremony. She was radiant in the practiced way she'd always managed, moving among her guests in her white dress, accepting compliments like taxes owed to her. When her eyes landed on Marcus at the back, sitting quietly in his plain gray shirt, something flickered across her face. Surprise, then satisfaction, then something close to pity. She crossed the lawn to him with Preston in tow, and Marcus stood to greet them. "Marcus, you actually came." Her voice carried just enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I wasn't sure you would. You invited me," he said simply. "I thought I should." Preston looked him up and down with the frank assessment of a man appraising a used appliance. "So, you're the ex-husband." He extended a hand, and his grip was the too firm grip of a man who thinks strength is a personality. "Diane told me about you. The engineer, right? Steady work, I imagine. There's always a need for people who, do the technical stuff." He said the technical stuff, the way you might say the janitorial stuff. "There's always a need," Marcus agreed, and let it lie. Diane's eyes drifted to the parking lot, where the corner of Marcus's white work van was just visible past a row of hedges. Her mouth curved. "Is that your van, Marcus?" "Oh," she laughed, a light little laugh designed to be heard. "Still driving that old thing. Some things never change, do they? Preston, you should see it. It's this dreadful old work van, dense and everything. I used to be so embarrassed to be seen in it." A few nearby guests chuckled politely, the way people do when a beautiful woman invites them to laugh at someone. Marcus felt the old familiar sting, and then, beneath it, the old familiar calm. "It runs," he said. "It's gotten me everywhere I've ever needed to go." "Well," Diane touched Preston's arm. "Not everywhere, I suppose." And she turned, satisfied, to greet more important people, leaving Marcus standing alone at the back of the garden, while 200 guests prepared to watch her marry a better-dressed, louder version of the man she'd thrown away. The ceremony proceeded. Marcus watched it the way you watch weather, present but unmoved. He watched Diane promise Preston the things she had once promised him. He watched Preston beam with the confidence of a man who believed he'd landed exactly the life he was owed. And Marcus, sitting quietly in the back, felt not anger, but a strange, gathering clarity. He had come to close a door. He was beginning to understand that the door was going to close in a way none of them expected, because here is what neither Diane nor Preston knew, sitting in the golden light of that late afternoon. 3 weeks earlier, Webb Sterling Development had finalized its acquisition of the debt on 2 commercial properties in the county, distressed strip malls that a leveraged real estate operator had failed to keep current. Marcus's firm bought distressed assets all the time. It was routine. He had signed off on the acquisition without reading the previous owner's name because the previous owner was small and the deal was small, and Marcus had 100 larger things demanding his attention. He did not know, sitting there watching the vows, that the man his ex-wife was marrying was the very operator whose foreclosed debt now sat inside Marcus's portfolio. Not yet. That revelation was still coming, and it would arrive from an unexpected direction. At the reception, the true shape of the evening began to reveal itself, slowly, the way a tide comes in. Marcus took a seat at a table near the edge, seated pointedly with the least important guests, distant cousins, and a +1 who didn't know anyone. He didn't mind. He listened. And, as the champagne flowed, he began to overhear the things people say when they think no one important is nearby. He heard Preston, 3 drinks in, telling a cluster of guests about his grand plans, his imminent expansion, the enormous deal he had cooking that would, and these were his words, make everything I've done so far look like pocket change. Marcus recognized the specific desperation in that boast, the sound of a man narrating success he did not have. And then Marcus heard something that made him set down his glass. A man at Preston's table, an actual local real estate figure named Harold Grimes, whom Marcus knew by reputation, lowered his voice and said, "Preston, I have to ask, is it true what I heard that Ashford and the Kingsway properties went to Webb Sterling Because if your notes got bought up by them, my friend, you are in serious trouble. Those people do not negotiate. They foreclose and they build. And Preston's confident face had faltered just for a second before he laughed too loudly and said, "Rumors, it's all handled. It's handled. It was not handled." And in that moment, sitting quietly at the far table, Marcus Webb understood the strange geometry of the evening with perfect clarity. Webb Sterling was his. The Kingsway properties were the ones his firm had acquired the distressed debt on 3 weeks earlier. And the man now married to his ex-wife, the loud tan man who had shaken his hand and called his life's work the technical stuff, was the debtor. Marcus did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply felt the pieces settle into place, with the quiet finality of a keystone locking into an arch. Some justice you have to build. And some justice, if you live your life with enough integrity, simply arrives on its own schedule and asks only that you not stand in its way. But the moment that turned the whole evening, the moment 200 guests would talk about for years, came not from Marcus's mouth. It came from the road. At 7:30, as the sun dipped and the tent lights bloomed to life, a long black car turned into the Ashford Drive. Not a limousine exactly, but something rarer and more serious, a hand-built sedan of the kind that arrives with heads of state and titans of industry, its paint so deep it seemed to swallow the light. It moved past the valet stand without slowing, past the German sedans and the Italian coups, and it came to a smooth stop directly before the clubhouse entrance, in the space reserved for no one, because everyone assumed no one that important would come. A uniformed driver stepped out, walked around, and opened the rear door. The reception noise dipped. 200 people turned to see who commanded a car like that. And out of the back stepped Patricia Vance in a sharp charcoal suit carrying a slim leather portfolio, followed by 2 associates and a man in a crisp Ashford management blazer, the club's general manager, whose face was pale and tight. They did not look like wedding guests, they looked like consequences. The driver, meanwhile, walked toward the garden, scanning the crowd, and stopped when he found Marcus at the far table. "Mr. Webb," he said, loud enough to carry in the sudden hush, "your car is here whenever you're ready, sir. And Miss Vance says the matter you asked her to look into is confirmed. She has the documents." You could feel the crowd recalibrate. You could feel 200 people rewrite in an instant everything they'd assumed about the quiet man in the plain gray shirt. Mr. Webb. The Webb. Diane, standing near the head table in her white dress, went still. Preston, glass frozen, halfway to his mouth, looked from the black car to Marcus and back again, with the dawning horror of a man watching a foundation crack beneath a building he'd bragged about owning. Patricia Vance crossed the lawn with the club's general manager beside her, and she stopped before Marcus and inclined her head. "Sorry to interrupt the festivities, Marcus, but you asked me to confirm the ownership chain on the Kingsway acquisition before you left tonight, and I thought you'd want to know in person." She glanced at Preston, then back at Marcus, and lowered her voice just enough to be intimate and just loud enough to be devastating. "The debtor on the properties we foreclosed on 3 weeks ago is Halloran Holdings, Preston. He's the one whose default triggered the acquisition. He currently owes Webb Sterling just over $1.4 million, and the redemption period expires in 9 days. The silence that followed was total. Somewhere a champagne flute was set down too hard. Diane's face had drained of all its practiced radiance. She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. And Marcus watched the understanding move through her like cold water. The engineer, the quiet man with the work van, the man she'd outgrown, the man whose life's work she'd called the technical stuff. He wasn't just a guest at her wedding. He owned the ground beneath the tent, the debt beneath her new husband, and the entire narrative she'd spent 4 years telling herself. Marcus stood slowly and set his napkin on the table. He did not raise his voice. He never had needed to. "Preston," he said, and the tan man flinched at his own name. You called my life's work the technical stuff. Earlier, I didn't correct you. It seemed rude at your wedding. A pause, long enough to feel. The technical stuff bought your debt 3 weeks ago. I didn't know it was yours until an hour ago. Believe me, I take no pleasure in it. But since you brought up my van, I thought you should know what it's carried me to. Preston set down his glass with a hand that had begun to shake. Now, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Mr. Webb, I'm sure we can. Businessman to businessman. There's no misunderstanding, Marcus said gently. There's just arithmetic. You're leveraged past recovery, Preston. Everyone at this table who works in real estate already knows it. I suspect the only person who didn't know is standing beside you in a white dress. He turned to Diane then, and there was no cruelty in his face, only a terrible, quiet clarity. You told me an hour ago that not everything I drove had gotten me everywhere I needed to go. You were wrong, Diane. It got me here. It got me to a life you never bothered to believe in. Diane's mouth opened and no sound came out. 4 years of certainty collapsed in her eyes. This was the moment the story turned entirely. The reversal complete, the diminished man revealed as the one who had held the ground the whole time. Marcus could have stopped there. Many men would have. He had every right to let the evening burn down around the two people who had mocked him. But this is where the measure of a man shows, not in how he wins, but in what he does once he has won. Marcus looked at the wreckage of the wedding, at the horrified guests, at Diane frozen in her white dress, at Preston pale and stammering, and he felt no hunger to grind them further. The satisfaction of being seen truly at last was enough. Cruelty would have made him smaller, and Marcus Webb had spent his whole life refusing to be made smaller by other people's smallness. Patricia, he said quietly, give Mr. Shirt. Halloran, the standard extension, the full 90-day redemption window, not 9 days. And if he wants to sit down next week and discuss a restructuring in good faith, I'll take the meeting personally. He turned back to the stunned crowd. I didn't come here tonight to ruin anyone. I came to close a door. I came because 11 years meant something to me, even if it stopped meaning something to her. I'm going to leave now. Enjoy the reception. The venue's been paid for. A beat by me, as it turns out. So please, have another glass on the house. He walked toward the black car with the whole garden watching in stunned silence, and just before he reached it, Diane found her voice. Marcus. He stopped and turned. She had crossed part of the lawn toward him, and her radiance was gone, replaced by something rawer and more honest than anything he'd seen from her in years. Why, she said, and her voice broke on the word. Why did you never tell me all those years? If I had known, if I had just known what you were building, I never would have. And there it was, the thing that told Marcus everything he needed to know about who she had been and who she still was. That's the answer, Diane, he said softly. You never would have left if you'd known I was rich. But you should have stayed, because I was good. You couldn't tell the difference. That's not my failure, it's yours. He let that land, simple and devastating and final. I hope you find the life you deserve. I mean that with no bitterness at all, but it was never going to be with a man you married for his balance sheet. Take care of yourself. Then Marcus Webb climbed into the back of the black car, and his driver closed the door, and the vehicle pulled smoothly away from the clubhouse he owned, past the German sedans and the Italian coupes, past the old whitework van sitting in the far corner of the lot, which he arranged to have collected the next morning. Because that van had done its final job. It had carried a good man to the exact place where the world finally saw him true. In the weeks that followed, the story rippled outward the way these stories do. Preston Halloran offered a fair 90-day window and a genuine chance to restructure, squandered it. Because men who have never built anything rarely know how to save anything. His properties went to foreclosure, not out of Marcus's spite, but out of Preston's own incapacity. And within 4 months, the marriage that had begun with such expensive fanfare quietly dissolved because it turned out neither party had actually married a person. They had each married a bank account that did not exist. Diane, humbled in a way that money never could have humbled her, took a modest apartment across town and, according to Tyler, began the slow, difficult work of becoming someone who might one day recognize goodness when she saw it. And Marcus? Marcus went back to work. He kept building quietly, the way he did everything. He never spoke publicly about the wedding, never gloated, never told the story at dinners to make himself look large. But he did do one thing. He bought another work van, plain and white and unremarkable, and he drove it to his job sites just as he always had, sleeves rolled up, paint on his forearms, so that his crews would never forget that the man who signed their checks had built his life with his own 2 hands, and that no amount of success was worth a single ounce of the arrogance he had watched destroy 2 people in a single evening. So, let me leave you with this tonight. The world will always be full of people who measure a man by his car, his clothes, the loudness of his laugh. They will look at quiet decency and call it weakness. They will look at patience and call it a lack of ambition. And every so often, life arranges things so that those people learn, all at once, exactly how wrong they were. But here is the deeper truth Marcus understood that Diane never could. Real worth was never about the reveal, the black car, the $1.4 million. Real worth was in the years of quiet building, the integrity he kept when no one was watching, the refusal to become cruel even when cruelty was handed to him on a silver platter. That's the man who wins in the end. Not the one with the biggest car, but the one who never needed you to see it. If this story moved you, if you believe that good men and good women are worth more than their bank accounts, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people can find this channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had you figured out? Where in the world are you watching from tonight? I read every single comment, and I'd love to know your story. Subscribe and stay close, because I've got more tales of quiet strength and long-awaited justice coming your way. Until next time, remember, never let anyone convince you that being good is the same as being weak. The two have never been further apart.